Shawn Bradley. This was a man who was a physical specimen, one of the most successful players at the high school level that we've ever seen. Although a lot of his success had to do with his ridiculous height, he was still touted as a very skilled player on both ends. However, as with most players who are gigantic, it's hard to tell if his skills are actually good enough to translate to the NBA, or if he just dominated due to his sheer size. That's why we've seen very few players around his height who actually became stars in the NBA. Unfortunately, while Bradley has had some good years, for the most part he did not live up to his draft position. But at the same time, he also wasn't as bad as everyone thought. From, all the highlights where he got posterized, a lot of people think he was a laughingstock, which was not the case. Anyway, how's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today let's talk about Shawn Bradley, the 7'6" giant, or the 229 centimeter giant for those non-Americans out there. But before we start, I'd like to thank Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Surfshark is a VPN service that encrypts all internet traffic sent to and from your devices. It ensures that your IP address remains hidden to make sure nobody can see what you do online, and it also blocks ads, trackers, malware, and phishing attempts. Personally, I like to use it while traveling. Not only does it save mobile roaming data, but it also prevents thieves from stealing my personal information if I'm using public Wi-Fi somewhere. It also lets you access geo-restricted content. In some countries, you can't even watch the NBA. You can also use it to access certain movies or TV series that might be unavailable in your country. For example, The Hobbit is only available on Netflix UK, but with Surfshark, you can choose any country to stream from without being there. If you want to try it out yourself, click on the link in the description or go to surfshark.deals/AndyHoops and use my promo code AndyHoops to sign up for 83% off and 1 extra month free. The 1993 NBA draft class was one of the more underrated classes we've ever seen. There were a bunch of high-tier prospects, many of whom would become eventual superstars. The number 1 pick that year was Chris Webber. The number 2 pick was Shawn Bradley. Now, at first, this pick seemed like a shot in the dark, and everyone knew he was a risky choice. However, the Sixers were in the middle of rebuilding following the post-Charles Barkley era, and they needed a good center. They were already somewhat fine at the guard and wing positions, so the organization felt it was necessary to take this chance on him. I mean, what other opportunity can you get to draft a 7'6" guy? It looks kinda bad in hindsight as they passed on 2 future All-Stars taken right after him, Penny Hardaway and Jamal Mashburn. All in all, Bradley was a huge question mark. In fact, after a great high school career, Bradley only spent 1 season in college at BYU. Then, he spent 2 years as a Mormon missionary in Australia. I mean, can you imagine this guy showing up at your doorstep trying to convert you into a Mormon? The first report of his journey was from an article in 1991. The mission, made by most Mormon males at age 19, means basketball will take a back seat along with dating, television, movies, and parties for the next 24 months. In its place will be religious study and 6 days a week of personal contacting, knocking on doors and talking to people on the street about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The 19-year-old Bradley stated, "The most contact I'll have with basketball will be just talking about it. I've played basketball most of my life, so it will probably be a little hard adjusting to life without it." So essentially, in the 2 years leading up to the 1993 draft, he didn't even play basketball. That's why his entrance was shrouded in mystery. On paper, and based off of what we saw in high school, he was a very agile, athletic center who racked up a ton of blocks, had a soft shooting touch, but was also very thin, as he weighed in at just 230 pounds at the draft combine. His light frame suggested that he'd get absolutely crushed in the paint. And this is the 1990s, so he'd be going up against guys like Shaq, Hakeem, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, a lot of massive centers who will simply overpower him. And despite his height, he would get bullied quite often. In his first few seasons in Philly and New Jersey, Bradley would be very inconsistent, often getting benched at the end of games due to his lack of endurance. While he was always a great shot blocker, that's pretty much all he had going for him. He even led the league in blocks per game in 1997. Despite getting stronger and more conditioned, none of that seemed to have helped any other areas of his game. He was still struggling to rebound the ball, averaging fewer than 8 rebounds a game as the starting center. What's even more embarrassing was his awful ability to finish at the rim. For a guy who's 7'6", he had a 44% field goal percentage, despite taking most of his shots in the paint. His hook shot was almost non-existent. Also, a knee injury in his rookie season did not help whatsoever, as it took a long time for him to regain his mobility. One of the best player comparisons for Shawn Bradley would have to be Roy Hibbert. Their strengths, their weaknesses, they were strikingly similar. The difference is, Hibbert was the 17th overall pick, while Bradley was 2nd, and probably should not have gotten picked that high to begin with. Here's one of the earliest scouting reports of Bradley, and it was fairly accurate. It talked about his height giving him a natural advantage in the paint. It talked about how his weak, light frame will cause him to struggle to get in position for rebounds. But what really stood out to me were these 3 sentences. Having Bradley in the middle will change entire teams' offenses once they see that he'll swat away a lot of what comes into him. The other important thing about Bradley is that it may take some time for him to develop. If a team needs an immediate impact player on the post, Bradley may not be your man. To address the first part of that report, while Bradley was excellent at racking up blocks, he actually had a very little defensive impact on basically every team he played for. In his early years, the Sixers and Nets were slightly better defensively when Bradley was on the court, but they were still near the bottom of the league. And even worse, his offense was so bad that his defensive ability wasn't even worth having. Whatever he added to his team's defense, he would negate it by being even worse on offense. As for the second part of the report, it would indeed take a very long time for Bradley to develop. He was a project. The Sixers told Moses Malone on the waning years of his career to help out the young Bradley and help him improve his postgame. They also hired multiple conditioning trainers and dietitians to help him get stronger and eat more. They even forced Bradley to consume a 7,000-calorie diet to help him reach his goal of 260 pounds, as he was still severely underweight. But that experiment totally failed. According to Bradley, he said, "I always felt as if force feeding wasn't natural. I felt as if I was shoving it into my body and my body wasn't handling it. It was almost as if it were rejecting it, as if it were a disease or something like that." Basically, Bradley had a hard time putting on the weight, and eventually the Sixers would completely give up on him. The Nets would do the same thing and moved on pretty quickly, after realizing that he probably will never improve. From 1997 until his retirement in 2005, Bradley would play for the Dallas Mavericks. Now, he was no longer pressured to live up to his hype, and instead, the Mavericks already had their own young stars rising up the ranks. While his numbers dropped off, his efficiency increased, and maybe he was more suited to be a supporting player, not the star of a franchise. With guys like Steve Nash, Michael Finley, and Dirk Nowitzki leading the way, Bradley became a great complement to their playstyles. Defensively, the Mavericks were basically below average the entire time, but Bradley focused more on his rotations and helping out his teammates who get blown by. Also, the fact that the Mavs were a top 5 offensive team for most of the time, it really helped hide Bradley's ineffectiveness. With so much offensive firepower, he didn't need to do much besides grab rebounds and finish the occasional pick and roll. His tenure with the Mavericks saved what was previously an awful start to his NBA career. And while he never lived up to his draft position, he still had a decent career for a guy who many believed was a complete wild card at the time of the draft. At the end of the day, Bradley was not a terrible player, but he was pretty bad in most situations, especially early on. Besides his shot-blocking prowess, there was really nothing else he did even at an average level. His poor shooting, his awful finishing in the paint, his slow-footed defense made him an easy target for opposing guards to switch on, and off the court, he did not have the motivation or mentality to be a star. It's a common belief that many players as tall as he is don't pan out because he was encouraged to play basketball due to his sheer height, rather than for the love of the game. Plus, the myriad of nagging knee problems over the years killed any chance of him regaining his athleticism, which is also common among taller players. So he had a lot working against him. But hey, the good news is, at least he'll be forever recognized in popular culture. Whether it's all the times he got dunked on or his brief appearance in Space Jam, Shawn Bradley will always be a part of everyone's memory. Anyway, that's all folks, that sums up the story of Shawn Bradley, a 7'6" giant with a roller coaster of a career. While he's always been recognized as a laughingstock, his career was not terrible. Let me know your thoughts on him in the comment section. Do you think his career would play out differently in the modern NBA? Do you think he'll even get drafted that high in today's landscape, where a lot of centers are going small and the usefulness of a tall, slow-footed center might not be as valuable? Thank you everybody so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. And once again, I'll see you next time. Peace.